The following segment on KROC AM is sponsored and paid for by Meshbesher Spence.
Zach Bauer from Meshbesher Spence is in the house.
Good morning, guys.
How you doing?
Great. Yourself?
Wonderful.
Pretty good.
Wonderful.
Pretty
Topic
good.
of the day is DUI.
Yeah, what we think we discussed it once before, that 1 in 7 licensed drivers in the state of Minnesota usually come into contact with law enforcement because of a DUI offense. So with the summer months and heating up and Thursdays on first, probably a good topic to try to tangle with today.
All right. Okay, so what is the, is it 0.08?
0.08 is the standard. It used to be 0.10 about maybe 10, 11 years ago, and it was moved to 0.08 on almost a national basis. So every state has a 0.08 level, and you can actually be charged with DUI in kind of 4 or 5 different areas. You can be under the influence of alcohol, meaning that you are over 0.08, and that's a per se guilty, so to speak. As long as you're over 0.08, you are perceived by the legislature and by the state of Minnesota to be under the influence, even if a person may be able to pass field sobriety tests. You can be charged with test refusal, which is currently right now being appealed to the Minnesota Supreme Court as to whether or not our test refusal statute in Minnesota is constitutional or not. But for the time being, the law is that if you refuse to take a chemical test, either blood, breath, or urine, the state can prosecute you on a higher level than if you had just taken the test typically.
Can you request a certain type of test, or if one is not looking good, try another one?
So it's interesting. If the police officer says can you take a breath test for me, you have to take the breath test. You cannot ask for a alternative test. However, if they request that you take a urine or a blood test, you are entitled to request the alternative test. So if you don't want to take a blood test because you don't like needles being in your arms, then you'll have an opportunity to take a urine test. And that's not refusal. You are entitled to that alternative. But if they give you a breath test, since that's considered to be the least intrusive, you are obligated to take that test right now the way the law stands.
Okay.
Here's where it gets sticky, though. Everybody has a different tolerance for how much liquor they can drink, not what kind, but how much they can drink, and get to that 0.08.
Yeah,
and that's the problem.
Different people have different tolerances based upon how much they drink, how much you weigh, male or female, how tall you are. So there's lots of different variables that go into that. People have different burn-off rates. So a person that's a more experienced drinker can burn off the alcohol faster than maybe a person that's a less experienced drinker. So that plays a role in things as well. But
how does experience play into the burn-off?
So, for instance, a person that maybe is a heavy drinker, they will burn off alcohol at usually a rate of 0.020 per
like their
hour.
body is better at doing it?
The body
because
is
of the
better,
practice?
Because of the practice, so to speak.
Wow.
Better they'll burn it off. Where a person that maybe is less experienced will burn off at about 0.015.
All right, so you get pulled over, and obviously cooperate as best you can.
I think cooperate as best you can, although I would typically tell people that the officer is going to ask you if you consume some alcohol. You can tell them that you consumed alcohol. I think it's better to be probably truthful in that scenario. But the officer will then ask you if you want to perform some field sobriety tests, and those are balance tests. You don't have to. You don't have an obligation to do that. You do have an obligation at some point to provide a preliminary breath test. If you refuse, you definitely will be arrested. But it might make some sense for a person to say, I'm going to decline to do your field sobriety test, but I'll take your preliminary breath test. If you blow higher than 0.08, they're going to take you down to the law enforcement center. If you blow less than 0.08, they're probably going to let you loose.
Okay.
But they might have pulled you over for some sort of, you didn't use your blinker, you were going too fast. They have to pull you over for a reason?
They have to pull you over a reason. In Minnesota, the standard is reasonable articulable suspicion. So essentially that means if they believe that there's a substantial likelihood that you've committed a crime. And that can be a relatively minor traffic offense, obviously. But if, for instance, they pull you over for not using your turn signal, that in and of itself doesn't necessarily indicate that you're under the influence of alcohol. So if you don't give them additional evidence, such as field sobriety tests and lack of balance, then they're really tied into just whether or not you're going to be over 0.08 or less than 0.08.
But then checkpoints, they'll, in holiday weekends or different times, they'll say, we're going to have checkpoints out. They let you know that they're going to be out. So then that's just you are getting stopped because you're going past a checkpoint.
Yeah, that checkpoints in Minnesota, it kind of depends on how they frame it. Checkpoints themselves are something that are typically challenged by defense attorneys as being an unconstitutional way to practice that stop, because they need to have an articulable reasonable suspicion to initiate that stop and to restrain your liberties. And the fact that it's just a weekend or a holiday weekend doesn't necessarily equate to that. But they will tell you, as most people here in southeastern Minnesota know, that when you approach a holiday weekend, state patrol, law enforcement, they're going to be out more in force, and they're going to be looking for some of those minor violations to initiate stops, because their goal is to keep the roadway safe.
Well, I guess the bottom line is, if you're going to be drinking, don't drive.
That's
the
safest surefire way to make sure you don't run into those issues.
I always have a concern if I was ever pulled over, even if I hadn't had a drink, I would not be able to say the alphabet backwards.
Oh, hello? The balance test? Yeah. The balance test makes me nervous.
I thought of you then. But, I mean, there are certain abilities that some people just backwards.
Better start practicing.
I know. Z, and then I get lost. But anyway, if anybody has questions on this, or maybe they've got, for whatever reason, they want to get a hold of an attorney at Meshbesher and Spence, like you, Zach Bauer, what do they do?
They can reach us at the office at 507-280-8090, or reach us online at www.meshbesher.com.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, guys. You have a great day.